The police station smelled of bleach and fear. She stood at the counter, clutching her thin backpack like armor, eyes scanning the polished floor that reflected her shadow back at her. The officer laughed, a hollow, sharp sound that cut through the quiet. He did not see a girl, he saw assumptions, stereotypes, a story he had already decided. She dared to speak, voice steady, words that felt heavier than her frame. Her mother was a 4-star general. The laughter paused, the air thickened, and then came the long, slow silence. Something unspoken waited just behind the closed doors. If you want more shocking stories of injustice and courage, subscribe to my channel, Racism Untold Stories, and never miss a story that will open your eyes. The morning sun fell across the cracked sidewalks, warm but indifferent, highlighting the unevenness of a city that divided its residents by invisible lines. She walked quickly, sneakers scuffing against concrete, every step measured, deliberate. The worn straps of her backpack dug slightly into her shoulders, a quiet reminder of all she carried, not just books, but the weight of expectation, of legacy, of the eyes of a world that constantly underestimated her. Every corner, every street lamp, every passing car seemed to carry its own judgment, silent but heavy. She learned early that the world often treated her as if she belonged somewhere else entirely. Her name was Maya. She was 12 years old, but the poise in her posture suggested someone older, someone who had learned to navigate both subtle and overt prejudice. Her skin was the color of rich soil, and her eyes were sharp, observant, like a hawk surveying the horizon. She had grown accustomed to the way strangers' gazes lingered a fraction too long, the way teachers' voices softened differently for her classmates, and the way some doors seemed permanently closed unless someone with privilege or power opened them. Her life was a quiet series of battles. She fought silently, invisible victories measured in small triumphs, answering a question correctly, finishing homework meticulously, walking past a sneer without breaking stride. Maya's mother was the cornerstone of her life, a figure of authority and strength, who had commanded respect in rooms where men in suits thought they held all the power. She had risen through the military ranks to become a 4-star general, a rare achievement for anyone, let alone a woman of color. Maya had grown up with her mother's image always in the background, a symbol of discipline, courage, and unwavering focus. The photographs on their living room wall showed her mother in crisp uniforms, medals gleaming, eyes steady and commanding. Each time Maya looked at them, she imagined herself walking through the same doors of power, carrying the same quiet force that her mother exuded. But today was different. Today was not about photographs or imagination. Today was about proving her place in a world that had already decided she did not belong. The police station loomed ahead, a monolith of steel and stone, the kind of building that seemed designed to intimidate anyone without status or connections. Its walls were polished, cold, and efficient, reflecting authority rather than humanity. The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, and she stepped into the antiseptic interior. The smell of disinfectant hit her first, sharp and almost painful. The room hummed with quiet activity, the rustle of papers, the clack of keyboards, the murmur of voices filtered through glass partitions. Every sound seemed magnified, like an orchestra highlighting her own heartbeat. Maya approached the counter, clutching her backpack straps tightly, trying to steady her nerves. The officer at the desk was middle-aged, clean-shaven, uniform pressed, but eyes sharp with skepticism. He did not smile. His gaze swept over her, taking in the small figure, the neat uniform, the worn shoes. She could feel the silent questions weighing on her. What is she doing here? What does she know? Who brought her? The weight of assumptions was tangible, pressing against her like the walls themselves. She did not flinch, did not retreat. She had been trained to observe, to endure, to measure every moment and wait for the right time to assert herself. Maya's mission was simple on the surface. She had come to report a theft from her mother's office, an item taken without permission, a violation of rules that should have been straightforward to resolve. Yet, in a world that judged by appearances, nothing was straightforward. Her age, her skin, her quiet demeanor, all markers that, in the eyes of this officer, diminished her credibility. She had learned that credibility was not given freely to someone like her. It had to be claimed, sometimes painfully, sometimes strategically. She noticed the officer smirking, a slow, deliberate curl of his lips that spoke volumes. He leaned back slightly in his chair, arms crossed. His body language was clear. He considered her a curiosity, a small anomaly that would entertain him for a few moments before he returned to his routine. Maya felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the flash of anger she had learned to temper with patience. She understood that his amusement was not personal, it was systemic. It was the same laughter that countless others had endured, the same disbelief aimed at anyone who challenged the neat hierarchies of power. Her gaze flicked to the side, toward the slightly ajar office door. Beyond it, the low hum of activity, the metallic clicks of keys and phones, reminders of a world moving forward, indifferent to assumptions and prejudice. She imagined her mother walking through that doorway, the authority she carried palpable without a single word. That thought steadied her. She straightened, shoulders squared, chin lifted just enough to claim presence without arrogance. Her voice, when she spoke, would need to carry the weight of that truth. The credibility inherited from years of observing her mother, command rooms full of generals and politicians. The officer finally spoke, a tone that attempted politeness but could not disguise the undercurrent of disbelief. His words were measured slow, almost theatrical, as if preparing for the punchline of a joke. Maya felt the familiar surge of anticipation, the electric tension that came from waiting for recognition or dismissal. Every fiber of her being knew that this moment could go either way. She could be laughed at, sent away, or, just maybe, she could shift the perception of someone who believed he held all the power. Her backpack shifted slightly as she adjusted her grip, a subtle movement unnoticed by most but deliberate for her. She had rehearsed this moment silently, imagining every reaction, preparing for the weight of prejudice pressed against her. She could feel the contrast acutely, the officer's polished shoes, crisp uniform, and assumed authority against her worn shoes, neatly pressed but modest uniform, and the quiet confidence that came from lineage and lived experience. The world had already placed them on different planes. She was about to collapse that distance with nothing but a statement of truth. Then she inhaled deeply and let the words form. Her mother was a 4-star general. She spoke with clarity, each syllable deliberate. The officer's reaction was instantaneous, a sharp intake of breath, a flicker of amusement that had been lurking in his eyes, now fully exposed. The tension in the room shifted. Time seemed to slow. The hum of activity, once background noise, became a stage for the impending confrontation. Maya did not retreat, did not falter. She had planted the seed of truth, a seed that would grow, whether the officer chose to water it with recognition or try to smother it with denial. Outside, the city moved on. Cars honked, pedestrians passed, and the sun continued to climb. But inside, within the polished walls of that station, a quiet reckoning had begun. Assumptions, prejudice, and skepticism now faced an unyielding fact. The girl before him was the daughter of a 4-star general. The officer's laughter, the weight of his disbelief, the invisible barriers of authority were on the cusp of collapse, though neither he nor Maya fully realized it yet. She stood poised, a small figure, with a legacy too large for the room, waiting for the moment when truth would demand recognition. The officer's smirk lingered, sharp and calculating, as if he could already predict the outcome of the encounter. Maya felt the weight of his gaze, heavy and dismissive, but she did not flinch. Each laugh, each subtle movement, was a reminder of the invisible walls built by prejudice, the walls she had navigated her entire life. She understood that this encounter was not merely personal. It was emblematic of every moment when society measured her worth through skin, youth, and assumed station. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting harsh reflections on the polished floor, turning shadows into exaggerated shapes. Maya could see the outline of her own tension in the reflection, shoulders squared, eyes fixed, fingers gripping the edge of the counter. The officer leaned back, folding his arms, his expression a mixture of amusement and disbelief, and in that instant, Maya recognized the subtle cruelty of his power. He did not even need to speak to undermine her. The laughter, the posture, the slow tilting of his head, all communicated judgment. Every second stretched unnaturally long. She noticed other officers nearby, a few glancing with curiosity, others pretending not to see. Their reactions were telling. Even within the structure of authority, her presence disrupted an invisible balance. The air was thick with expectation, a waiting room of tension, where injustice and truth hovered like twin specters. Maya's heartbeat quickened, not from fear, but from awareness. She had been trained by observation, endurance. and the memory of her mother's commanding presence to seize the moment when subtle power could be challenged. The office door shifted slightly, a metallic whisper that hinted at movement inside. Beyond it, the hum of activity typing low conversations. The click of a phone was a reminder that the world continued, indifferent to prejudice. She imagined her mother walking through that doorway, her presence alone sufficient to demand respect without raising her voice. Maya could almost feel the weight of legacy in that sound, a quiet, invisible force that could topple assumptions. The officer finally spoke, though his words were laced with disbelief. He asked questions, carefully framed, as though testing her story, each phrase dripping with subtle mockery. Maya felt the sting of judgment, the undercurrent of racial bias that had been present since the moment she entered. Yet she remained composed, answering carefully, deliberately, each word chosen to carry the weight of truth. He could not see the quiet authority behind her calm. The resilience born from years of learning to navigate a world that underestimated her. Time became elastic. Moments stretched and compressed, every movement magnified in significance. The officer's smirk began to falter, tiny cracks forming in his facade of confidence. Maya observed these cracks carefully, noting the shift in body language, the slight hesitation in his tone. Prejudice, she realized, was brittle when confronted with quiet determination and unassailable truth. The scales of authority, once firmly tilted in his favor, began to wobble imperceptibly. The tension grew heavier, palpable in the space between them. Maya could feel the collective weight of all assumptions pressing against her. Every stereotype and bias condensed into a single smirk, a single dismissive gesture. And yet, beneath that weight, there was a lesson she had absorbed over years. Endurance could bend perception. Persistence could carve a space where none existed before. She inhaled deeply, centering herself, letting the legacy of her mother's authority flow through her. The subtle sounds of the station, the shuffle of papers, the distant hum of air conditioning, the faint echo of boots on tile became a rhythm for anticipation. Maya felt each heartbeat in sync with that rhythm, a drum marking the rise of tension. Every detail mattered, the gleam of the officer's polished shoes, the tilt of his badge catching the fluorescent light, the way he adjusted his tie with barely perceptible nervousness. She recognized the contradiction inherent in the system. Those who appeared confident often wielded power unjustly, while those judged lesser carried truths too potent to ignore. She shifted slightly, just enough to feel the backpack strap against her shoulder. Small, mundane actions became statements of resolve. The officer's laughter began to lose its sharp edge, faltering under the weight of unspoken challenge. Other officers, noticing the tension, exchanged fleeting glances, aware that the encounter was no longer routine. The room, sterile and controlled, was now a stage for confrontation between truth and assumption, between inherited authority and superficial power. Maya felt the pressure intensify as she imagined her mother's approach. Each step she heard from the office beyond the slightly ajar door was deliberate, measured, and resonant with command. The metallic rhythm of polished boots against the tile floor grew louder, each step a reminder that authority founded on integrity eclipsed authority founded on arrogance. The officer's eyes flickered toward the door, betraying the faintest glimmer of anxiety, though he would not have admitted it. Maya felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing the truth was about to confront prejudice directly. Time seemed to stretch further. Each moment waited with anticipation. The officer's posture became less certain, a subtle shift in stance, a small frown replacing the previously amused smirk. The murmurs of other officers became noticeable, quiet, suppressed, but present. Maya felt the moral contradiction intensify. Those entrusted with enforcing justice often perpetuated bias, while those judged by society's narrow lens bore integrity and truth. Every second of observation sharpened her understanding of the fragility of assumptions, the power of perseverance, and the inevitability of confrontation when truth was undeniable. Finally, the office door began to swing open fully, announcing the arrival of someone whose presence alone demanded attention. The footsteps were deliberate, resonant, echoing through the sterile space, commanding the room without a single word. Maya felt a surge of anticipation, a quiet thrill that the long-expected confrontation was about to reach its tipping point. She remained composed, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the officer, who now faced the approaching force of authority with a flicker of uncertainty. The figure entering the room was unmistakable. Polished boots, impeccable uniform, medals catching the light, posture flawless, gaze unwavering. Every movement exuded discipline, experience, and command. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Silence replaced the previously casual environment. Other officers instinctively straightened, awareness sharp as they recognized the embodiment of true authority. Maya remained steady, her quiet presence amplified by the approaching revelation, knowing that the moment of reckoning was imminent. The officer's smirk vanished entirely. Laughter, once a tool of subtle cruelty, was replaced by hesitation, unease, and disbelief. The balance of power previously assumed to favor him was collapsing under the weight of undeniable truth. Maya sensed the system itself wobbling, the invisible walls of assumption beginning to crumble. She had not moved an inch, yet her presence, her story, and the legacy she carried were sufficient to disrupt the hierarchy of prejudice. Maya felt a mixture of exhilaration and calm. The struggle had not been physical. It had been moral, perceptual, and emotional. Yet every beat, every second, every subtle shift of posture and expression brought her closer to the revelation she had anticipated. She had endured countless invisible injustices, and now the culmination of patience, observation, and inherited discipline was about to manifest. The officer, confronted by truth, could no longer wield power through arrogance alone. In that charged silence, the stakes were clear. Every assumption, every stereotype, every microcosm of systemic bias had been challenged. Maya understood the paradox. The very people entrusted to uphold justice were often blind to it, while those judged powerless carried the capacity to expose hypocrisy. Her breath was steady, heartbeat rhythmic, mind sharpened. She waited for the culmination, the precise moment when the invisible scales would finally tip in favor of truth, and the officer would be forced to confront the fragility of his own assumptions. The door opened fully, cutting through the tension like a blade. Every sound in the room seemed to fall silent, every heartbeat amplified, every glance frozen mid-air. Maya felt a shiver of anticipation ripple through her, not of fear, but of the quiet certainty she had carried for years. The figure that entered was no ordinary presence. Boots clicked on the tile with deliberate authority, uniform immaculate, medals gleaming like silent declarations of decades of earned respect. Eyes locked, commanding attention without uttering a word. The air shifted, charged, as though reality itself had been rerouted to accommodate the weight of truth. The officer at the counter froze mid-laugh, the smirk that had mocked Maya mere moments ago, now replaced with disbelief. His posture, once relaxed and condescending, tightened, small beads of sweat forming at his temple. He had assumed the role of judge and superior, yet here, standing before him, was the undeniable reality of Maya's claim. He had dismissed her based on appearances, age, and skin, confident in his ability to belittle. Now, that confidence was collapsing like brittle glass under the impact of truth. Maya remained at the counter, a small figure framed against the imposing presence of her mother. She did not flinch, did not shrink. Her chest rose with quiet determination. Every lesson her mother had imparted, the discipline, the patience, the unflinching regard for truth converged in this moment. The officer's eyes darted between Maya and the general, searching for some escape, some rationale to preserve his ego, but there was none. The room seemed to contract around him, the sterile walls amplifying the moral weight he could no longer deny. Her mother's gaze swept the room, calm yet unyielding. Each officer instinctively straightened, silent acknowledgement of authority arriving before words were even spoken. The shift in energy was immediate. The officer at the counter who had previously wielded laughter as a weapon now found himself disarmed. Every gesture he had made to belittle Maya, every chuckle of superiority, now looked grotesque, absurd even. Prejudice, which had always given him comfort, now offered no shield. Time slowed. The metallic rhythm of her mother's boots reverberated across the tile, syncing with Maya's own pulse. The officer's throat tightened, his jaw stiffened. Recognition, shame, and panic collided within him. He had assumed dominance. He had laughed at the audacity of a young black girl claiming her mother was a 4-star general. Now, the audacity was the undeniable proof of a legacy he had ignored. The irony was cruel. Every moment of humiliation he had inflicted on others for their appearance, their age, their background, seemed to turn inward upon him. Maya felt a surge of calm satisfaction, not triumph born of cruelty, but the deeper, purer satisfaction of justice. She had endured countless microaggressions, dismissals, and subtle slights throughout her life. This moment was not vengeance. It was revelation. Every assumption, every invisible boundary that the officer believed was absolute, had been dismantled in the space of a single presence. The scales of perception had tipped, and there was no turning back. Her mother stepped closer, metals catching the fluorescent light in a halo of authority. The officer's eyes widened as he finally processed the truth fully. He had been confronted not just with fact, but with decades of disciplined accomplishment, the kind that demanded recognition, regardless of personal bias. The laughter that had once filled the room was now swallowed by the gravity of undeniable respect. Every officer present, even those who had previously ignored Maya, now understood the lesson unfolding before them. Authority without integrity is hollow, and assumptions rooted in prejudice are fragile. Maya noticed subtle changes in the room. Other officers shifted uneasily, some clearing their throats, others averting their eyes, recognizing that complicity in bias could no longer be maintained. The officer at the counter, once the embodiment of dismissive power, began to shrink under the weight of realization. His smirk vanished entirely, replaced by a pale, taut expression of recognition. The truth was relentless. He had laughed at a girl, judged her by skin and stature, and now the reality of her lineage and integrity confronted him with brutal clarity. The general, Maya's mother, did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence alone communicated decades of discipline, accomplishment, and moral authority. The officer's internal reckoning was visible in every twitch, every subtle movement. He had assumed superiority, yet now he faced a mirror reflecting his own prejudice and failure. Maya's words, once doubted, had become a living testament, a force that exposed arrogance, bias, and systemic injustice in one swift, undeniable moment. The emotional intensity in the room was almost suffocating. Maya could feel it pressing against her ribs, a tight weight of anticipation and moral satisfaction. She did not gloat, she did not mock, she simply stood, as she always had, quiet, observant. Resolute while the officer realized the magnitude of his misjudgment. Every microaggression, every dismissal she had suffered throughout her young life seemed to coalesce into this single, undeniable truth. The silence stretched, as if the world outside had paused to witness the unfolding justice. Other officers glanced at each other, small gestures of acknowledgement that the previous hierarchy of assumptions no longer applied. The lesson was universal. Appearances deceive, power without integrity is empty, and those judged as lesser may carry the most profound truths. Maya's mother did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her presence, coupled with the weight of truth, dismantled every unjust barrier erected by assumptions and laughter. The officer finally attempted a response, a faltering phrase meant to reclaim dignity, but it fell flat. The words sounded hollow even to himself. He realized too late that his authority had never been absolute. It was fragile, contingent on the ignorance and compliance of those around him. Maya, in contrast, had claimed power through truth, patience, and courage. The moral reversal was complete. The oppressor, who had used laughter as armor, was now exposed in vulnerability. The one judged powerless stood unbroken, unshaken, radiant with integrity. Maya allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile, not of triumph, but of recognition, of endurance, of the culmination of years of navigating a world biased against her, of the subtle victories earned in silence. The officer's laughter, once sharp and cruel, had no place in the room. It was replaced by a heavy understanding of his own failure, his own misjudgment, and the power he had underestimated in both Maya and her mother. In that charged moment, the truth became undeniable. Systems of bias, assumptions, and stereotypes collided with the force of experience, legacy, and undeniable authority. The officer, the embodiment of dismissive judgment, could not escape the moral reckoning unfolding before him. Maya had not just proven herself, she had revealed the fragility of every prejudice he had ever wielded as justification for superiority. The room exhaled, metaphorically and almost physically, as tension dissolved into recognition. Maya felt the culmination of patience, endurance, and inherited strength settle within her chest. The injustice, once palpable, had been confronted. The hierarchy of perception had shifted, leaving only the undeniable truth standing in stark relief. Courage, integrity, and truth cannot be silenced, belittled, or dismissed. For Maya, the lesson was profound. Justice, even when delayed or subtle, carries its own force. Prejudice, no matter how entrenched, is exposed by unassailable truth, and those who are judged, dismissed, or underestimated may one day become the measure of authority itself. The officer at the counter could no longer look at her or at the world in the same way. The office felt lighter after her mother's presence. The weight of tension that had hung like a storm cloud slowly lifted, leaving a quiet clarity in its wake. Maya remained at the counter, small yet unbowed, absorbing the significance of what had just occurred. The officer, once confident in his authority and laughter, now sat frozen in reflection, grappling with a truth he had refused to see. The room had shifted not just physically, but morally. Every glance, every gesture, every assumption had been challenged, and the world inside those four walls would never be quite the same. Maya exhaled, a slow, deliberate release of tension that had accumulated over years. She had endured countless moments like this: subtle dismissals, whispered judgments, the casual disbelief of those who assumed she was less because of her age, her skin, her quiet demeanor. Each experience had honed her patience, sharpened her awareness, and strengthened her resolve. The culmination of all those small, unseen battles had arrived in this moment, amplified by the presence of her mother and the undeniable weight of truth. Her mother spoke quietly, not for the officer, but for Maya. Every word was a lesson wrapped in authority, a reminder that courage and integrity carried their own power. Maya felt those words sink deep, filling the spaces in her mind where doubt had sometimes lingered. Justice, her mother seemed to convey, is often slow. It is not always loud, but it is relentless when grounded in truth and unwavering resolve. Maya had learned that the smallest assertion of credibility, the quietest act of endurance, can ripple outward and disrupt even the most entrenched systems of bias. The officer at the counter shifted uncomfortably, finally meeting her gaze with hesitation. For the first time, he seemed aware of the magnitude of the assumptions he had carried. The laughter that had been his shield, the condescending smirk that had dismissed her presence, had no place in the room anymore. He understood, perhaps too late, that authority rooted in prejudice is fragile. While authority rooted in truth and integrity is unshakable, the moral reversal was complete. Maya, once dismissed as a child, as someone too small or too young to command attention, had emerged with validation and quiet triumph. Outside the office, the world continued its indifferent rhythm. Cars honked, pedestrians hurried along cracked sidewalks, and the sun climbed steadily across the sky. Yet for Maya, the city felt subtly altered. The steps she had taken to get to the police station, the careful navigation of streets lined with subtle reminders of inequality, now carried new meaning. Every small act of perseverance, every moment she had endured dismissals and bias, had contributed to this reckoning. She understood that courage is often invisible until the precise moment it confronts injustice and reveals the truth in its full force. Walking out of the station, Maya felt a quiet sense of triumph. Not the kind that demands recognition, applause, or validation from others, but a deeper, more enduring satisfaction. The struggle against assumptions, prejudice, and systemic injustice had been a solitary one for many years, yet in this moment the culmination was visible. The lesson was clear. The world may judge superficially, may underestimate based on appearance, but truth, integrity, and resilience are the forces that ultimately command recognition. Her mother's presence, though commanding, had not overshadowed Maya. Instead, it amplified the quiet power Maya had carried all along. The incident was a revelation not only for the officer, but also for Maya herself. She realized the significance of inherited strength, of the values instilled in her from early childhood. Discipline, courage, and patience were not abstract concepts. They were tools to navigate a world that often judged unfairly. She understood that while she could not control the biases of others, she could control how she responded, how she claimed her space, and how she allowed truth to shine through. The office incident soon became more than a personal vindication. It became a quiet lesson for others who had witnessed it. Officers who had been complicit in the laughter and the casual dismissals now had a mirror held up to their actions. They had seen how assumptions can blind even those who believe themselves to be impartial. They had seen that integrity, patience, and courage, even when embodied by someone young and underestimated, can dismantle prejudice in a single, undeniable moment. The moral resonance of the event extended beyond the room, planting a seed of reflection that could influence the broader system. Maya reflected on the broader implications. This encounter was a microcosm of a larger reality, how society often underestimates those who do not fit its narrow definitions of power or credibility. How young black girls, often dismissed or marginalized, possess strength, knowledge, and the capacity to command recognition when given the chance. How prejudice, even in small, subtle forms, can be confronted, challenged, and dismantled through courage, preparation, and truth. She understood that change, however incremental, begins with moments like these, where assumptions are exposed, and justice, even in small measures, is revealed. Her mother's parting words lingered in the quiet hum of the city streets. Sometimes the ones we ignore are the ones who could save us. Maya felt the weight of those words settle into her heart. They were a reminder that authority and respect are not granted by position alone, but earned through action, integrity, and perseverance. She had been prepared by both her mother and her life experience to seize this moment. The revelation had not been loud, not accompanied by fanfare, but it was undeniable. The officer, once a figure of condescension and bias, now had to reckon with the truth in a way that could not be erased. As Maya walked home, her steps measured and deliberate, she carried more than personal vindication. She carried a lesson for anyone watching, anyone who might face prejudice or dismissive judgment in their own lives. Courage is not always loud. Strength is not always visible. Integrity, patience, and truth are the tools that dismantle bias, and they often arrive in moments when others least expect them. She had learned that even the smallest figure can alter the balance of perception, challenge injustice, and force recognition of truth. The world, for all its indifference, can be reshaped by quiet courage. Maya had not only defended her own credibility, she had illuminated the fragility of assumptions, the hollowness of superficial authority, and the power of inherited resilience and discipline. The moral takeaway was profound and universal. Those judged lesser, underestimated, or dismissed may carry the very truths that challenge injustice and transform perception. Would you have treated her differently if you had known the truth? Sometimes the ones we ignore are the ones who could save us. For more stories that expose injustice, reveal courage, and challenge assumptions, subscribe to Racism Untold Stories. Join us as we uncover the untold narratives that the world often overlooks. Stories that will inspire, shock, and open your eyes to the truths hidden in plain sight.